Here, uh, got it. And I think as long as only. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. This is 4S. I'm David Johnson. Let's get started with special guest Tyler Vela. How are you, Tyler?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. And we also have the host emeritus, Dale. Is
Hello.
it okay to say your last name, Dale? Do people know your last name?
Yeah, I think people know my last name at this point. So yeah.
Okay, Dale Lucifer. Welcome to the show. No, that's
I
sorry.
didn't say share my true last name. I have an alias. Come on, man.
I shouldn't have said that. I think I was overtaken by satanic stupidity. Let me. I'm sorry, Dale. You're a little bit quiet. I'm going to adjust your level here. 53.14. Okay, that ought to do it. All right. This is
There's so many. Tyler's just like, what the heck is going on?
There's some inside jokes, Tyler. I'm
Ah,
sorry.
I'm enjoying it. When I
There are
converted, I
people who are
convert.
slapping their knee and splitting their side right now.
Yeah, I converted with a 53.14% probability
Don't
that.
explain it. No, no, it's
Okay.
it's funnier if you just leave it alone. I'm gonna have shirts printed up, and people will be able to buy them, and it'll just say 53.14%. No explanation.
All right.
They're gonna sell
So
like hotcakes. Don't worry about it. Um, yeah, we've got Tyler Vela on the show now. Those of you who have watched the show this season, before the break in particular, you know that I did a show. Was it with Sarah? Did we?
yeah,
Was
two of them.
I think it was. I think it was with Sarah, and we discussed Tyler Vela, one of his videos, talking about his deconstruction, which is why the name of this show is Tyler Vela Deconstructed. I mean, he's done the deconstructing, but if we can deconstruct him some more, great. And we're going to get right into this. We've got a few things that we want to talk about, and so we've got Dale here to keep us on track. We have got some people lurking in the background, so they will probably say some things in comments that you will not see on the show, but that Tyler or Dale will bring into the show if
Yeah.
they find it worthy. That said, let's begin the way we normally do when we have a special guest. Tyler, who the heck are you? Why should anyone care? And how did you get from there to here? Introduce yourself, if you please.
Sure. I'm not sure why anyone should care, to be honest. But I appreciate the discussion. So I'm Tyler. I am the host of the Freed Thinker podcast, blog, and YouTube channel. Um, and that's been going for a very, very long time. It was actually a blog way long ago on like bulletin boards and LimeWire and all kinds of all that kind of stuff. Early in doing Christian apologetics, I worked my way through a philosophy program at a secular state school here in California. I was about one semester away from graduating with a double degree in English and philosophy, and I decided, you know what I want to do? I want to go work at churches instead. And so I stopped that. So I was about a semester away from that degree, which was, I look back and I mean, life is what it is. Worked bivocationally for a while, doing some church stuff, and then went to a small Christian college in Chicago called Moody Bible Institute, the name you can trust, and
Bible Elite
graduated
School, right?
there. With I was a pre-seminary major, which is basically it's basically a biblical studies degree, an academic focus to be able to start seminary without having to go through all the preliminaries that someone starting who is going to seminary with like a business degree or something went. So I had all the original languages and all that kind of stuff. Um, and then worked in church, did youth ministry, was an ordained elder in the PCA, which is a conservative Presbyterian denomination, um, and was about halfway through a graduate degree and academic degree in biblical studies, um, and doing the show. The show is largely on it was Christian apologetics, but it had kind of morphed into just a passion project. So whatever I was studying, if I did any research papers, I presented those areas of interest with regards to compatibilism, determinism, biblical studies. I like doing research papers on weird, obscure Bible passages. So I did one on like the trial by ordeal in Numbers 5, and so just did a lot of that type of stuff, and had did a lot of debates, in-person debates, online debates, dealing with atheism and naturalism and inter-Christian issues around free will and Molinism and Reformed theology and Calvinism and non-Calvinism. Did all that kind of fun stuff. And then about, I guess it's going on 3 years now. It was about 2 years when I made my announcement. Started having some intellectual challenges with my beliefs, with the Trinity, with I firmly committed to classical theism. Started finding out that the God of historic Christianity just was not what I was actually seeing in the Bible. So there's a lot of disconnect there. Started finding some problems of evil, problems of divine hiddenness, and some other issues. So intellectually, my belief started to erode, but I had this biblical concept of faith as trust, and so I maintained kind of a Pascalian stance where I was still committed and still trusting in Jesus, and even though I was starting to have major intellectual doubts about it, I still wanted to make sure I was doing the what I thought was the right affirmations, and not in kind of the new agey sense, but affirming the right doctrines, because I was like, well, maybe this is a dark night of the soul, maybe this is whatever it is. And so was staying committed, and I did that for about a year, and then that eventually just eroded away as well, and decided to end that commitment and step out. And I thought it was time to announce that I had officially deconverted. My church had known before I had stepped down from being an elder, quite some time before that, for various reasons. And yeah, so I still do the show. I still do the freed thinker. The meaning has now changed meanings what I'm freed from, but it was always kind of a double entendre on being freed in Christ, but also being a free thinker, because I like to argue and debate and think about things without any kind of ecclesiastical authority telling me what I had to. And now I'm freed from ecclesiastical involvement also, and some of those other things. And so still do it, still have discussions on the Bible. I still think the Bible is wildly interesting. I still think the Bible is one of the best masterpieces of literature ever produced. I think Christianity and Christendom is wildly important to not only the history of Western civilization, but the ongoing future of Western civilization. So I still find these things incredibly important. I still think theology is insanely interesting, and love having these discussions with very interesting people. So I still do discussions. Had one recently with Caleb Jackson and Colton Carlson on determinism and free will, and we talked about the Bible some in there. And so I still find this fascinating and interesting and important. So that's who I am and where I've come. And I also have two beautiful sons who I love, and a stepson who I love very much. So
Excellent. So let me just zero into the interesting question, at least the one that's interesting for me. Do you still believe in a God of some description?
yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Um, David, I don't know if you're familiar with David Kimball Cook. He is one who has a very different religious background from you, but he deconstructed, maybe a couple of years ago now. And he also maintains a God belief. And he's someone that I consider a friend. I don't talk to him nearly enough, but David, if you're listening, I'm still here. We'll get together again. Dale has had a chance to talk to David on his show.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'll just throw in though, he is the opposite of Tyler in that he's an open theist. So yeah, there's differences there. But yeah,
Right,
I've
but
been,
it's still a God belief
yeah.
of some description. And so, Tyler, let me ask you, zero in a little bit more on this God belief. Does this God belief include Jesus Christ as a God of some
No,
description?
no.
Okay. Would you describe your God concept as a God of the Bible, or maybe a God that's compatible with the Bible?
No, and actually that was that was part of what caused all the ruckus in my I wouldn't even say in my worldview, because I found that my worldview was far more aligned with classical theism. So it's largely what, if you want to boil it down, it's largely what we would call, the God of the philosophers.
So,
Um,
a God of the omnis, that's what I think of when I hear a God of
Omnis,
philosophy.
although, well, we'll talk about some of it, but there's the omnis. I think if such a being exists, he exists necessarily. That such a being would be ase, simple, right? All those kinds of things. I think those are all still true. Struggle a little bit with omnibenevolence, to be honest. Not sure exactly if the more I think about it. If those categories make sense for such a god. So that's a whole different question. But
I don't think the category makes sense at all. So,
but yeah, so so one of the things that's interesting, and this is common from what I'm hearing for the. By the way, I'm new to this whole thing. I was not involved, so like I don't know the difference on the terminology between like deconversion and deconstruction and all that kind of stuff. So if I use them wrong, I'm sorry. I don't know if they have nuanced
I don't think
differences.
there is a wrong. I think that
Um,
we're all trying to figure out how to talk about this stuff, and deconstruction is just kind of the thing that has risen to the top.
Yeah, I know there's like a bunch of literature that's coming out, so I just, if I use it in unnuanced ways, I apologize. I know it's someone's hobby horse, somewhere that they're going to get all up in arms if I use the wrong one. But one of the things that I find interesting about deconversion is that when, as a Christian, when I was always I always thought I was a free thinking person, in the sense that I would believe what I thought the evidence was. The arguments were good. I wasn't like, oh, well, I have this ecclesiastical commitment. I was a Reformed Presbyterian. I was ordained in the Presbyterian Church. If my views change, fine. I just would have told my elders my views changed and step down from ordination and change denominations if I needed to, if I needed to, if it had moved that much or something. Like I didn't have any type of external pressures to believe any. I have to maintain this specific thing.
Hmm.
So, but what I found was, because I was like, oh, I have this super kind of Christian category that I was. In order to in maintaining consistency within that system, you start kind of having to, like, it's like those cartoons where you start having to push down this lump. If something else comes out, you have to keep this one down and find a, like, it just becomes this like juggling act to like keep it all flat and in line. Um, and that impulse is kind of gone. I mean, I still want consistency in a worldview. I don't want an inconsistent worldview, right? Consistency, I think, is still a vital part to any worldview. But I'm much more comfortable with saying, I don't know how that works. I think there's, and this will come up in why I still believe in God. Um, I still think there's value in saying, I think there's really good evidence for, or really good reasons and arguments to believe in A. There's also really good arguments and reasons to believe in B. As long as they don't contradict each other, I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. There, that level, there's some like consistency freedom in there, and I don't want, there are going to be, you know Christians who are out there and be like, see, Tyler's admitting he's just inconsistent and doesn't care. I mean, I think anyone reasonably listening understands that's not what I'm saying. But there's like almost not this like compulsive need to be able to, which, and I think this largely comes out of the apologetics community that I was in. This like compulsive need to make sure you have like everything has to have this explanation, because you have to be able to defend everything all the time. And that kind of ethos is gone. And so I feel much more at liberty to be like, I I think there are answers in the right direction. I think there's good reasons to believe this, right? So when we talk about the reasons for God, I think, God is the best explanation of things with the least amount of ad hocness, the least amount of like appeals to brute facts, right? I think it's a much more plausible answer. But if you ask me, well, why is there then evil? Because all theism has a problem of evil. All worldviews have a problem with evil. It's more pointed on theism. I think it's wildly more pointed on any type of religious theism. I'm going to say, well, I don't know. I'm still working through that part of it. I don't know. So
So I
I
was
have
just gonna
an
pull.
audience.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I
Oh,
was gonna pull Dale in at that part of the discussion.
we have
When Dale
yeah,
is done, I want you zero in a little bit more on the characteristics of your God, so that I can understand it better. But Dale, go ahead.
yeah, no, we just have an audience question that I think fits in well with what Tyler was just talking about, right? So you kind of answered, why did you stay a theist when you deconverted? You kind of answered that in what you just said. But you mentioned as kind of a falsification, look, you still want logical consistency and philosophical coherence. But Darren asks in the audience, as an atheist, a materialist, he's kind of saying, well, what if you learned about scientific answers for those reasons? Like basically, is there anything about science and your knowledge of this from science that could make you abandon your theistic beliefs in any way? Or
yeah, it's a good question. So he did ask about why I stayed a theist, and I can let me add just a little more bulk to that. And it's largely for explanatory value, right? So I still think I'm still somewhat of a presuppositionalist in the sense that I still think having a mind, a personal agency, is a far better explanation. I don't have the impossibility of the contrary anymore, but I still think it's a far better explanation, almost in a if you think of the types of arguments William Lane Craig gives for like intentionality, right? Or if you think of the moral argument, whatever you think of the moral argument, that's a transcendental argument. It's saying that God is the necessary precondition for there to be these objective moral values and duties, right? I still think that even if it's not a deductive argument, I still think kind of abductively having God as this precondition for rationality, intentionality, laws of logic, why there's something rather than nothing, the uniformity of the laws of nature, why there's persons, minds, right? All of these kinds of features, and I find that to be an elegant answer, right? It fits a bunch of the explanatory virtues, right? It's not ad hoc in the sense that we're not making it up to fit these answers, right? We already have this concept of God, and it just happens to fit all these things. It's simple. It has broad scope in the sense that it's one answer for all of these questions without having to go to a different answer for all of these ones. So it has all these explanatory virtues. And I think when you do a conceptual analysis of what type of thing that would have to be, having something that is transcendent and immutable and a say and necessary and spaceless and timeless and immaterial and all this kind of stuff that doesn't fit in the material kind of sense of the natural. I know it gets weird to talk about like nature and or natural and supernatural because they're just not good. They don't do it right. I'm not happy with those terms. But whatever we kind of are getting at by those things, I think God fits as an explanation. Now we can dig into those and challenge those and push those around and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's kind of the answer in the right direction for explaining. So I still think it's there. As for the scientific question, I should preface this. I was a conservative, evangelical Presbyterian, like Reformed Presbyterian, right? And this might sound weird, but I wasn't a fundamentalist, right? Even though I thought the Bible was inspired and inerrant, right? I'm not a fundamentalist. Like I would be the person that if someone who was, gay or transgender came into church, I'd be so happy that they were there. Right. We had neighbors, that was a gay couple and one were going through counseling. And so, I made sure we were cooking them dinners and we were doing childcare and we were doing like all kinds of stuff because like whatever you think of the lifestyle, I'm like, they're still, for me, I was like, they're still imago Dei human beings. We still should love them. And right now they are part of the least of these in this country, right? It is our jobs as Christians to love and care and support for. whether or not you agree with, lifestyle. That person was, committing adultery, but they were a straight couple, and one was going through cancer and had childcare. Wouldn't, Christians do all kinds of stuff right there? So there was all kinds of stuff. I was a creationist in the sense that I thought God created all things. I wasn't an old earth creationist. I wasn't a young earth creationist. I wasn't a theistic evolutionist. I just didn't think the Bible was talking about those types of things, right? So I didn't have a bunch of this like, oh, well, if I found out evolution was true, my faith would be shipwrecked. I'm like, I didn't think that's what the Bible was about anyways, right? Because I took kind of an ancient Near Eastern temple text polemical view of Genesis 1 and all those types of things. So I didn't have those issues. Right. So when I deconverted, it was largely for philosophical issues, inter-theological issues, like I started to think no explanation of the Trinity makes sense. And not in the kind of crass, like, oh, well, you're saying there's, if there's one God and three persons, that's three gods, right? I think those aren't good objections to the Trinity. But when you start getting into the relationship of the Trinity and eternal generation and these different views of how the relation, well, then you start having the Son. They're all equally divine, but the Son is not a say because he's eternally generative of the Father, and then the Spirit's not a say because he's actually proceeds from both. And unless you mean those in purely relational terms, that's going to be this. They actually have a different type of divinity. One, the Father is divine by necessity. The other, has a deity. The other two are contingently divine, which means they have this weird attribute of being eternally say divine and a contingent. It just started getting all kinds of mess. Same with the hypostatic union, right? You start getting all these issues with the hypostatic union and what it means for the Son. Now, in order to maintain omniscience, the Son almost has to be right. I talked about this in terms of impeccability, right? Sinlessness, right? In the divine person, he's impeccable, cannot sin, impossible to sin, is eternally and immutably righteous, right? With respect to his humanity, will not sin, but could sin, which means you have this weird modal property of it is impossible for the Son to sin, but it's also possible for the Son to accrue a sin debt to himself. But now you're like, okay, but that's a contradiction within the same person. And so now you have, okay, well, he has a human mind and a human person. So it's like, okay, well, so the Son now is there's a Trinity, but then the Son is the person of the Son subdivided into two person, right? It just starts getting so wildly messy to the point where I was like, now this is just ad hoc. Now the explanations, we are just creating stuff to get out of these, because it just, rather than just saying, it just doesn't make sense.
So let me I hate to get in front of this train.
Yeah. Sorry, I was.
Oh, no. It's I would love to talk about that for 2 hours. Anyone who has listened to my show knows that's where my heart is. So I'm a theology nerd. I guess you'd say I'm a counter theology nerd now, but I grew up in the church, and I was bred to be exactly what I am. They just wanted me to be on the other side. But so I am what I am. We'll talk about that too, time permitting. But I want you to just zero in on a little bit more about your God, because you mentioned William Lane Craig, and in your first set of comments, you described God in the same type of way that William Lane Craig describes God, except I get the distinct impression that William Lane Craig's God is very different from your God.
Yeah.
And so we know how your two God concepts are similar. Tell me how some of your God concepts are different.
Yeah. So this is going to get wildly nuanced very, very quickly, because William Craig is also a Molinist and a non-classical theist. It's sort of a non-classical theist. He would say he's a classical theist. He's sort of not, because he starts getting into, well, okay.
Hey, go ahead and briefly define those terms for the audience, because we just assume when we throw around terms
Yeah.
like classical theist and Molinist and Reformed that people know what we're talking about, and I found that even among Christians, most they don't.
Yeah. How to briefly describe this? Oh, so classical theism is a view of God by the classical attributes. So timeless, spaceless, immaterial, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, but also has these other properties, right? So simplicity is one. So the doctrine of divine simplicity. If there's some really good lectures by James Dolezal on that one, which I think are very, very helpful introduction to it. But divine simplicity doesn't just mean simple in that he has no divisible parts, but it actually means simplicity in that there's actually no discrete distinctions within God's own nature, right? So when we talk about God in different ways, and we talk about omnipotence, and we talk about God's actions, and we talk about God's thoughts and all that kind of stuff, those are statements of predication. Where that's our ways of describing it. Those aren't actually different parts within God. They're not actually divisible, distinguishable things within God. Like we actually, we might be able to talk about the difference between our body and our mind and our emotions and all that kind of stuff, and understand those as discrete things. When we talk about with God, it's simply we're simply saying it by way of predication so that we can conceptualize them, but they're not, it's not actually describing real differences in God. So divine simplicity.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny because I don't actually think of the different things in humans that you just mentioned as discrete things. I think of us as simple in that way too.
Interesting.
You
that'd
cannot
be a very
separate
interesting whole
body
other
and mind
conversation.
and-
Are you?
yeah, I mean, you can't separate body, mind, and emotion. I mean, you can try. I mean, we have to do it for language, for communication purposes, but in the same way that you're saying, yeah, we do that for God, but in truth, he's one thing. I think that we are too.
Yeah, interesting. That'd be a fun different conversation.
One thing I'll just-
I'm a hylomorphist. I'm not a substance dualist. I'm not a dualist, but I'm also not a monist. So and it's also somewhat vague and abstract. But I have a hard time understanding for similar reasons. I have a hard time understanding what it means to say I have a soul and a body, for lots of different reasons. But and I was that way as a committed Christian, even before I started losing my intellectual.
So don't lose your place there. I want you to come back to that as you were describing this stuff. Dale, you were trying to jump in.
Oh, no, I was just going to make a kind of an off the cuff comment about what you guys were saying about because there's an interesting debate about Tawhid in early Islam, the first few hundred, where they go into back and forth debating this very question about, is God simple or not? How do we explain his multiple attributes and stuff like that? So I was just going to throw that in there as an interesting point in a different religion where they had this same debate.
Yeah. Okay, so go ahead and pick up where you were and continue with a thought on how you differ from Craig, because I know that there are listeners right now who are thinking you're using all the same language.
Yeah, sorry,
but you come to very different conclusions about who God is.
I was transferring some coffee and spilled a little bit. Sorry. So there's also there's divine simplicity, which Craig denies, right? Or he denies at least. He would hold to divine simplicity simply in the fact that God does not have any divisible material parts. Mm-hmm. So he has a very, very soft view of divine simplicity for various reasons. He thinks that God, for example, was timeless, but enters into time at creation. He thinks so that's a little bit different. There's some debate about whether or not Molinism is this. I probably can't do it. I don't think I can do Molinism in a really short period of time. Molinism is a specific view about God's different types of knowledge in relationship to his creation. It's an attempt to kind of rescue sovereignty from issues of free will and determinism and all that kind of stuff, so that God weakly actualizes this world based on this thing called middle knowledge. He knows what libertarianly free creatures would do in any specific context, and so he then kind of actualizes based on that. I think there's all kinds of problems with it. But one of the problems that I think with that is that it seems to place, and he's admitted that if you mean by contingency this thing, then fine, but God isn't contingent in his nature. But some things he knows, the things that ground God's knowledge, are actually these kind of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, so that what we would do in these cases are actually the things that ground what God knows in his middle knowledge. And so for a classical theist, I'm going to say, well, then you have God is no, you can't say God has aseity. God is no longer ase, in the sense that aseity means that he's entirely non-contingent on anything outside of himself.
What about personal?
What's that?
What about personal? I heard you use that word before, and one of the big distinctions that is sometimes made would be a personal God who wants relationship with you and who wants things from you,
Yeah.
and wants to do things for you, versus the God of the deists, kind of the clockmaker God who makes it and winds it up, but doesn't really have anything to do with the day-to-day.
This is where I'm fuzzy, because I think God has a mind. So I should back up. Classical theism also has a strong view of language about God. So when we speak about God, we speak about God by analogy, or by, anthropomorphism and analogy and all that kind of stuff. So when we talk about God, when a classical theist talks about God having a mind, we don't necessarily mean that, and this came up in my debate with an open theist named Warren McGrew a lot. He did not get this point at all, and became somewhat dishonest about it afterwards. But when a classical theist says, for example, the thoughts of God, we roughly mean, we think that God has thoughts, right? But what we don't mean is that God goes through a process of thinking about things to arrive at a conclusion, right? God doesn't have this kind of reflective type of thought. He has God thoughts, beliefs, whatever it is, but it's a different type of thing, but it's the only way that we can talk about it, right? So we have this kind of analogous language about God. So when I say that God is personal, I just mean that God has a mind, God has a will, right? God is an agent, that type of thing. When I was a Christian, I would have said God is personal in the sense that he wants relationship. He wants to obviously redeem you, save you, find you in Christ, love you as a father, all that kind of stuff. I think that the problems of evil, suffering, and hiddenness have just, I don't think that's not even in, I don't think that's in the realm of possibility anymore. So when I say that God is personal, I mean it kind of in that metaphysical agency sense, not in God is my loving father who wants to,
Okay, so I don't see how that differs from deism then. So when you say God has thoughts, the way you describe it, what I hear you saying is God has knowledge. He knows everything, but we have thoughts because we contemplate things. We don't know everything. So I
would say that
distinguish. I just have a slight distinction between thinking about things and knowing things. And if you know everything, there's nothing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come down to how you define it, right? Because if you think of thinking as purely as the process, then I would say no, God doesn't have thoughts. If you think about thoughts, kind of in the sense of it's this category of, it's kind of a colloquial way to talk about beliefs. Well, knowledge just is warranted true beliefs, right? So it depends on how you kind of slice that pie. I know what you're saying, right? So if you say, well, we go through that process, the one you say, well, God doesn't have thoughts in that sense. If we mean it kind of in the analogical sense, where we can talk about the mind of God and he has, knowledge and in that type of sense, well, then I think he does have thoughts. They're just divine thoughts or a different type of thing.
I think Tyler's just kind of say like he doesn't go through the process of deliberation.
Yeah.
And inferring stuff kind of thing. But yeah, obviously a belief, knowledge, part of the definition, one of the components is belief, and beliefs are thoughts. So
and I would say that another difference is that, even when we have knowledge, it's still contingent, right? It's still via observation, right? Even if we don't go through the entire process, right? I think we have knowledge as kind of like a justified true belief that the external world exists. I still only know that by observing, right? By experience and having this tactile experience and all that kind of stuff. I still think that even that would be analogous to talk about God's knowledge, right? God's knowledge of the world that he created. I still think that the causal arrow goes the wrong direction in that sense.
Maybe. I mean, you have to think about it to know it. God knows it without thinking about it.
I'm not sure you have to think about it to know it, to be honest. There's a really great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I recommend. It's a very, very interesting book because it talks about all the things that we all of our beliefs, all these kinds of things that are kind of actually precognition, precognitive. And it's a very, very interesting book. I recommend. I mean, I'd be open to talk about that and think about that, but I'm not actually sure that everything we know is via a process of thought.
So I'm gonna leave that there, and I really don't want to. But look, call me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Call me when you got 6 hours. But I want to, there's so much about this that I want to talk about. We've got other topics to get to, but I will shortcut much of what I have to say and ask about this in this way, if I can, which is the way you're describing your God. Like I said, it really does sound a little bit more like deism than theism to me, the way I think about it. And so why should anyone care about your God? Your God is there, so is a nebula 3 billion light years away. Don't care about either one of them. And the nebula is vast and beautiful and great. Might even have thoughts. Don't care. So, for the Christian God, the classical God of the Bible, there's a reason to care. You better care. Things will happen if you don't care. So tell me, why should one care whether your God exists? So rather than debating you about whether it makes sense for your God to exist or not, just why would it matter?
Yeah. Well, let me come at it from two different ways because I don't think I'm a deist, right? I think while it's not entirely helpful, there's problems with the analogy. I think the author analogy is helpful, right? I'm not sure that Shakespeare was uninvolved or didn't care about Hamlet's Denmark. So I don't think that God is involved in the sense of answering all your prayers in kind of this father type of sense. God may be involved in answering your prayer in the sense of the sustainer of all things, but that might not be the same thing. But I'm not sure he doesn't care, right? I would not be surprised, right? I've talked about this before. I wouldn't be surprised if, well, and sorry for all the stop and starts. I don't think that this is true. I don't know if there's good arguments for it, all that kind of stuff. I think it would be an elegant thing. It'd be cool, whatever. I wouldn't be surprised also if we found out that something like reincarnation is true, right? Because it seems to me that even if there is a God, maybe he likes the elegance of the story. Maybe he likes maybe he in kind of this grand masterpiece sense, maybe there is this rise and fall and tragedy and triumph, and maybe there are all these elements to it, and maybe there is this sense of, I think there is something beautiful and elegant about reincarnation and going through all these multiple lives. Again, I don't think it's true, but I just use that as an example of there could be these kind of grand narrative things that we're not able to see on our level, that could be there. So I don't know if God intervenes or not. I don't know if he's active. I just don't.
Let's just say that he is.
But I don't think it's in the sense of I have this personal relationship with God type of way.
Right. So I was just going to grant you all of that. Just
yeah.
God is real. He's there. He is involved. He cares, but you don't know his thoughts. And if he wants something from you, you don't know what it is. So why should we spend one moment thinking about this God?
Yeah. So well, I think truth is important. And so I think it is the case that if if Shakespeare or if Hamlet could have figured out that he was a character in a novel, rather than, whatever, then that would have been an important thing to know, even if it wouldn't have changed how he interacted with Ophelia, for example, right? So I think these are interesting, important. I think they gear toward truth. I think if you I think our metaphysical commitments matter to other things within our theological system, right? I think those starting things pay dividends, or I don't know what the opposite of dividends is, negative, whatever, down the road on other categories that you can, it's like if you put I think in analogies, if you put a level on a wall, if you're, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a degree off, you might not see it for 100 feet, but you're going to see it 100 miles down the road, right? So I think these things matter and are important. They may not matter and be as important as religious people think that they are. They may not be as directly important to things, but I think they matter. I think they matter on the grand scale of things. I think, as we see as we've seen the rise of various, secular worldviews and things, I think there are some secular worldviews and positions that, even atheists and secularists don't like. There was a really interesting paper written by a guy named Steinrucken called "Secularism's Ongoing Debt to Christianity." He's an atheist philosopher, and he talks about about how kind of Christian ideals have shaped positive views of secularism, but that there are these other examples where, with kind of sans those, you kind of get these negative ones. Now, it's not to say this isn't a post hoc ergo propter hoc or whatever, right? It's not saying that without Christianity all secularism would always be Stalinist Russia, right, or something along those lines, right? I'm not saying that, but these things, they matter. They do shape the way that we think about things. They do kind of say what paths are open to consistent discussions and which ones aren't there. So I think that's kind of a vague way to answer it, but hopefully meaningful.
No problem. Dale, close out this part of the discussion.
That's what I was just gonna say. Yeah, I was just gonna.
Let's do the. This is fascinating. I know that Dale is very interested in a lot of this stuff, and Dale and I are going to talk about it.
I already invited Dale on my show in the chat, so he already.
I didn't see it, but yeah, I'd love to be on your show, kind of thing.
Oh, sorry,
yeah, I'm inviting myself
Darren.
too. So
I was sorry, Darren did. I already invited him to come have a discussion.
Oh, you want Darren? Oh, okay, very well.
Yeah, you guys can come too.
Hey, I'm coming.
I love these types of discussions.
You're gonna have to bar the door.
Sounds good. So, all right, cool. So yeah, my last question, and then because we've got about 5 minutes for this section according to my timing, but. So dang you, Tyler, because geez, I had a clever way of asking, but you just answered that question in your last response. So I'll throw that away. But one thing I guess I just want to ask you is, okay, great. Throw Christianity away and stuff like that. That's fine. But I'm wondering why are we, I haven't heard your reasons as to why are we assuming God isn't this quote unquote personal being, in the sense that, yeah, he does want a relationship. Like why are you thinking that isn't the case?
Yeah. So part of that is, as I think a lot of that comes from religious foundations, right? I think I call myself now, I'm a non-religious theist, right? I don't have these like religious ritual, sacred textual things driving, what I think or how I act or what I believe or what that, how I view that relationship with God, or if there is a relationship with God, or what, I now think the relationship is far more akin to Hamlet's relationship to Shakespeare. The part of that is positive and negative, right? In the sense of argumentation, right? Some of it is, I just see no reason to think that it's the case anymore, because a lot of the reason I came to think that was the case was because I believed that Jesus was, the incarnate second person come to redeem a relation, and fix this relationship with God and all those types of things. The other reason is, and I go into this in my intellectual reasons for not believing, I've just come to be convinced by arguments from divine hiddenness. And I found that actually theodicies, I had this weird experience, and I as I've talked to more people, they it wasn't new with me, but I think I found a way to describe it in ways that people are like, oh, that's a good way to describe it. Theodicies actually became the opposite of helpful. I found that theodicies, rather than starting to kind of assuage some of those problems, even if they didn't solve them, I think the idea is they kind of start getting you in that direction. I actually found that I was like, well, if that theodicy is true, holy crap, that actually makes it way worse. Like in this other way, you may have helped, this much on, something, but you just open the floodgates to this whole other world of problems that it seems way worse to me. So example, like the free will theodicy is an example, right? So um thanks. The free will theodicy, this explanation that God allows evil and suffering because there's free will, right? A lot of people are really convinced by this, right? And maybe it's because I'm a compatibilist. I don't think it's a good explanation for lots of philosophical reasons. I also don't think I don't think it's a good explanation because the problem of suffering doesn't even the theodicy gives us an opportunity to see that the problem of suffering isn't even actually about willing, right? It's about outcome, right? So you have all these examples where I'm going to try to not trip the sense. Let's just call murder rather than all kind of the other emotionally driven ones that would trigger algorithms and stuff. Murder, right? Someone could freely decide to murder someone, shoot a gun, and God could intervene to prevent the outcome from happening, right? So you could easily come up with all kinds of way that God could prevent. We can grant for argument, oh well, you could have these like evil thoughts and evil intentions, and maybe we lie to each other and stuff, but God could intervene and stop, human sex trafficking and murder and genocide and all this kind of stuff. And he could do it in ways that are entirely consistent with natural law, because it could just be a law of nature that any blunt object moving with any type of intentional malice behind it, or even accidental, towards an image-bearing human would turn into a marshmallow, right? That would just be the uniform law of nature. So you get rid of that, like, oh, well, it'd be an inconsistent universe. No, that would just be the uniform law of nature. It would just turn into a marshmallow. No one would ever die by any type of malintent from anyone else.
Or no one would ever question it, by the way.
No,
because if that's how it always worked, then that's just nature.
Yeah, that's just nature, right? But people could freely choose to shoot guns.
Yeah.
Right. So
I totally
free will
agree.
doesn't even get at the problem of it. And then you start asking, well, so then if God could do all that, but then doesn't intervene to prevent child sex trafficking or murder or whatever it is, right? Then you have to come up with all these other things, right? Because now it seems that God knows that that's going to be the outcome, doesn't want it to be the outcome, could prevent it from being the outcome and maintain freedom, but still doesn't, which of an evil voyeur God feels worse than a God who decrees things and determines that happens, but has some type of redemptive moral value, redeeming, whatever for it, right? Whatever you think of that explanation, like you've gone 5 centimeters with your free will answer, but you've opened this whole door to that voyeur God being much, 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 much worse. And so I can go through all the theodicies. I think each one goes 5 centimeters forward, 5 miles back. And so and for all of that, I can't understand what that means for God to be like a loving father then at that point. So I think these types of things, divine hiddenness and problems of evil and problems of suffering, actually give positive reasons to think we're not in that type of relationship with God. Because if we were, holy hell, that's awful.
Hey, Dale, take like 1 or 2 minutes and have the last word on that.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, I just wanted to very quickly ask. You don't need to give a long answer, but in terms of the theodicies that you were saying, so everyone, David knows it, and I'm not going to mention it here. I'll just say it has the initials MD for my answer, right? But so you mentioned that all the theodicies go about 5 centimeters, but there's this huge gap in between. Now, my theodicy, or really it's a defense, I call it the Molinistic defeater, this incorporates multiple type, right? So free will is a component kind of thing. Although I don't agree with Richard Swinburne's mechanistic argument that you refuted there, but there's free will as an element. There's also this element of soul building and saving as many souls as possible. But so I just wanted to say, do you think that people that kind of have a cumulative theodicy that involves multiple components, do you see them as doing better, or do they only go 5 centimeters? Like, yeah.
So I'll give you my short, cheeky answer first, and then I'll give you a little bit more robust. I think putting 5 bottomless buckets inside of each other doesn't miraculously hold 5 bucketfuls of water. So no, I don't think it helps, because I think, again, come on my show, let's have a discussion. I think that often to hold when have you ever talked to someone and they hold one answer and you push to rescue that one, they have to go to another answer, but in order to hold that answer, you kind of have to undermine your original answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? I find that experience every time I talk to someone who has these kind of like cumulative theodicies, right? So in order to defend the free will one, you to rescue it, depending on what you're talking about, you have to go to like consistency one. But in order to then, well, I could say, well, it could be a law of nature, consistency. Oh, well, then it's going to be the soul building one. Well, if it's a soul building one, then why is like the victim isn't going through soul building? Oh, it's this ultimate redemption one. Well, why couldn't you just go to ultimate redemption? Oh, because you have to have free will to get, like, it just so yeah, I don't think the cumulative is that helpful.
Gotcha.
Perfect. I get the intent behind it, and I can see why people would, but I think at the end of the day, no.
Gotcha.
So
right. Yeah,
let's jump to the question of whether or not there is a good reason, or whether there are good reasons to stop believing in a faith. I think that I am going to present the reverse Craig on this one. The full frontal Craig would be
Monty,
lower the bar for belief. Don't let all these skeptics talk you out of your faith. In order to believe in the Christian God and the Christian propositions, you should lower the bar, not raise it. I am going to say that I believe that in order to stop believing, you don't need heroic reasons to stop believing. You should lower the bar to stop believing, because skepticism should have been your default position all along. Skepticism, not the same as cynicism. Skepticism should have been your default position all along. And if you find that it was not your default position, then you should change your orientation so that skepticism becomes your default position and develop good reasons to believe. And if you cannot do that, you should absolutely walk away from faith. I will just go ahead and add this to round off my thesis, and I will open the floodgates. The reason you shouldn't have to sweat that much to stop believing is because if there is the kind of God you believe there is, the listening audience who are Christians, classical, mainstream Christians, if your God actually exists, it should be almost impossible to stop believing. If you have the Holy Spirit in you, telling you, reinforcing your faith and Christian ideas and beliefs as is described by the Sensus Divinitatis, but you don't feel that, you're not conscious of that happening and aware of any way, then it's perfectly fine for you to stop believing. If that thing was there, you shouldn't be able to. The same with other things. Let's say that you got the wrong information about God, and the God that you believe in is horrible. I've heard this many times. Christians say, well, I wouldn't believe the God that you believed in either. Okay, great. But I have spent my life studying God from different perspectives and listening to all kinds of people. Let's say I got the wrong idea about God before I stopped believing in God. God could have intervened and led me to the right beliefs about God. but he didn't do it. And so you see, the problem with the Christian God is there's magic that should keep you from leaving. There's magic that should make the God knowledge so upfront and center for you that it's practically impossible for you to do it. And so if you don't have that keeping you in there, then your skepticism should be your default position. And you should ask yourself, wait a minute, why don't I feel this sensus divinitatis? Why don't I feel the blessed assurance of my salvation? Why don't I feel the presence of God when I talk to him and study and pray? So yeah, I think that almost any reason is a good reason to walk away, and there are very few good reasons to go toward faith. That said, I think that it would be entertaining if Dale and Tyler just had some conversation on this, because I would love to hear the perspectives of both of you here. Are there good reasons to walk away? Tyler, if so, what kind of reasons are good reasons to walk away?
You're muted, Tyler.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry. I missed about 10 seconds of what you're saying, but I think I got it. For some reason Zoom just kicked me out. I don't know why. I think there's good reasons to walk away. I walked away. So I think there are lots of good reasons to walk away from faith and belief. I will.
Oops,
I did lose
frozen,
your
Tyler.
audio. Uh, hey Tyler, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Try killing your video and see if that helps with your bandwidth. In the meantime, I'm going to throw it to Dale, and we'll get back to you when your audio's back.
Yeah, so in terms of the question, are there good reasons to walk away? As a committed Christian myself, this may surprise you, but I agree with Tyler. I think that there are, and I myself did walk away. I mean, this is forgotten by the skeptics on SNS sometimes, but I mean, remember back in 2010 or thereabouts, I thought I had sufficient reason to doubt the truth of Christianity. And because of that, I didn't believe it. So I walked away. And that's what you're supposed to do. So a reason is just any reason that overall gives you an overall probability that Christianity is false, or let's say you're just agnostic. You don't have enough reason to say, yeah, Christianity is probably true. That's good enough for you to walk away because you don't believe that. So I take a strict evidentialist perspective on this. And I think that the sufficiency threshold is more than 50%. I disagree very strongly. And I was shocked a little bit when William Lane Craig is bringing in kind of a pragmatic encroachment approach, or, some other philosophers, moral encroachment. I don't think that these positions are correct, epistemically speaking. I think that we should base it on the reasons, on the evidence. Obviously, the reasons that we have to be warranted. I mean, you can't, well, I ate pea soup today, therefore Christianity's false. No, that's a stupid reason, right? So, but it has to be based on the evidence, I think. I don't think we can take into consideration pragmatic stuff or moral considerations, and then because of that, oh, okay, well, 10% is good enough for me to believe. On the flip side, I also would scold atheists and skeptics, because you also are just as bad as Craig on the opposite end. You'll say, well, unless it's proven beyond reasonable doubt, I'm not going to believe. I need 95% proof or whatever it is. No, it's got to be on the evidence, and strictly on the evidence. And if it's more probable than not, you believe. If it's 49% or below overall, then you disbelieve. If you're 50-50, then you should remain agnostic and just suspend judgment until you have further evidence. So that's kind of my general take. But my answer in a nutshell is yes, there can be good reasons to walk away.
Tyler?
Sorry, I dropped and came back.
That's okay. That's why we have Dale. He's great filler. He's
joined
actually more than great filler. Just wanted
I
to-
joined it on my phone too. So if for some reason my computer drops again, I'm just gonna go on my phone and do audio
Yeah,
only.
don't worry.
Did you hear my answer? Or?
Yeah, I heard your answer. I think I'm largely in agreement. You know, I don't know. It could be wildly unnuanced and unphilosophical of me. I just kind of go back to you should believe or not believe what you think is reasonable to believe or not believe. And that's not always going to be, you know, that's not you're not going to get like this massive surge of certainty. You're not always going to have like the world's best evidence. You have to go you're going to go on probabilities a lot of time. You're going to go, I mean, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, like in a vacuum, we would love to be perfectly reasonable and rational, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of times we're going on kind of like gut impression and what feels right is, you know, I don't have a problem with seemings and intuition as viable reasons for belief or believing in a certain direction. You may not have certainty, you may not be able to defend something, but you know, I think that's something like that is okay. So
I I think though,
unless you have
Tyler,
defeaters for things or whatever it is. So
right? But I mean, let's leave defeaters out for the moment because we can get mired down as past shows have done there. Um, I think it may be slightly more nuanced than that, but maybe not much more nuanced. I think the thing that you your answer and that Dale's answer are not incorporating are the claims of Christianity and the seriousness of those claims. If someone comes to me on the street and asks for a couple of dollars because their car ran out of gas and they just need to get some gas money, I'm skeptical. I mostly don't believe them. I've encountered this story many, 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 many times. People have lots and lots of ways of panhandling, and that's one of them. And I don't have to get proof that their story is true or false because the only thing on the line is a couple of bucks. So if I've got it and I'm in the right mood, maybe I'll give it to them. If I'm not in the right mood, I won't. It doesn't matter. It's a couple of bucks. Give it to them. They lied. They wouldn't drink a beer. So what? If they come to you and ask for $1,000 because they were on their way to see their dying grandmother and someone waylaid them and stole their wallet and they took their plane ticket and they just need to get another plane ticket to go see grandma before she dies, I'm going to tell them to beat feet. Because that's where my skepticism, it's skepticism both ways. But here I need way more to go on than your sob story, because sob stories are a dime a dozen. So I think that you have to take into account the claims of Christianity. Yeah, you can believe it if you're, if you think it's probably true, or disbelieve it if you think it's not probably true. But I think the claims are more than that. The claims of this God and what he can do in your heart, in your life, in your mind are stronger than, believe it if it seems right to you. It's stronger than that. And so your belief has to be to take those claims into account. Also, you're out a lot more than a couple of bucks. You're a lifetime of servitude to a God and sacrifice of maybe some things that you want to try to follow still small voices and, go on a mission trip or whatever instead of pursuing your doctorate degree, whatever it is. It's a lifetime of service to this God that has to be taken into account. And so I think that because of these things, there should be, in fact, a stronger degree of certitude emanating from this God who gives us faith in the first place. That it is true. And if you don't have that, even if you think it's more probably true than not, but you're kind of 51% on that, that's not what the promises and claims lead you to expect.
Am I, because you involved me as a participant,
I involve you in a participant, sir.
All right, if it's okay. So I would just want to say, so that's understandable, right? But remember, there's a difference between the epistemology question about belief versus, the pragmatic question, okay, well, what am I actually going to do based on this belief? And stuff like that. So I think you need to separate that out, right? Because sure, maybe if you're Mike Lacona has in his book on the resurrection has a great example of a risk assessment view, right? Okay, well, let's say all the evidence points to this stock is probably being a good thing. You're 55%. Let's just say that's what the evidence supports, that you should invest in it. Well, either regardless of you investing $1 or you investing all of your money, it's still the evidence still warrants you in believing that you should invest in this or it would be a good investment. Now, the fact that we may be illogical and emotional and be very, yeah, but is that good enough for me to actually commit and invest in it? That could be a different question, right? Like just like in the law, we can still believe OJ was guilty, even if we can't commit to it because it didn't meet a certain practical threshold for us to do something on it. So you can separate those out. Obviously, for me as a pure evidentialist, I might have an issue and say that no, you should follow the evidence where it goes, kind of thing, right? But someone could make that distinction. Also, there is a question. You want Brian asks a question for me actually about what I was talking about with these probabilities. So he makes a good point. I've critiqued Dale's approach here before because it's way too binary in construction and implies way more precision in measurement. Landing at exactly 50% in order to be agnostic just doesn't map to the bluntness in how we perceive the world and firm beliefs. So I'll agree with Brian in what I said. It does sound that way, but I'll just remind him that actually I'm not requiring precision in that way. Remember, I operate in terms of probability ranges. So there's the reasonableness range and stuff like that. And it's debatable, but there could also be this agnostic range. I put that, between 55 and 45%, that kind of range where, some philosophers like Liz Jackson, who's my epistemology professor during my master's, she might say that, okay, well, it is rationally permissible. If you were at 45%, you don't have to disbelieve. You could even believe it within that agnostic range, so that there could be like what I'm saying could be consistent with that. Yeah, I just sort of lean towards I think that the most consistent approach is to just look, we have this obvious sufficiency threshold of 50% that everyone can agree on. That makes sense. It's more, if it's 51%, it's more probable. If it's 49%, it's improbable to that degree. And I think it just makes more sense to apportion your beliefs accordingly rather than saying, making up these arbitrary things where, well, why 45 to 55? Why not 40 to 60? Or why not a larger thing? There's just a lot of arbitrariness, I find, when you bring in pragmatic or moral considerations and try to arbitrarily say, well, okay, I need this much before I'll believe or disbelieve.
Let me give Tyler the last word on this, but I want to throw in this thought, Tyler. I think that one of my objections here isn't really being addressed, and it's probably because I'm not making it well. So I will try one more time as I toss it to you. By putting it in a kind of a calculus, a probability calculus, all the onus to believe is on the human, and it's just it's almost a matter of guessing. I see this amount of evidence over here for, I see this amount of evidence against. I'm not sure, but I'm going to make a guess. And that's kind of, all of the onus is on the human to do that. But I know for a fact that Dale doesn't believe that. And a lot of Christians don't believe that all of the onus is on that. One of the objections on the board, we were discussing this to some degree in this past week, posted by a Christian who disagrees with Dale on this. I would have to agree with them on this, which is that if we are going to be consistent about what Christians say is true, We don't believe based on our coming to the right understanding of the right facts. We believe because God gives us the gift of faith. And without God acting, there is no faith. And my contention is that if God is acting in that way that gives us faith, we ought to have more than a good, strong guess. We ought to have something more like certainty. So you've got the last word on this. We'll jump to our last topic.
Sorry, I'm trying to fix my computer. I'm gonna leave my computer. I'm just on my phone now. So
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, so I think I understand your question now. I had a different answer because I thought you were asking something different. Um, my initial thought, I'll just say it because I thought you were asking something different. My initial answer is just going to be, well, I think that there's kind of a difference between a top down um, way to understand things and a bottom up way to understand things. And I think the Christian or the religious person or the people in other views are gonna think much more top down, right? They're going to say, well, I don't think about this whole like going to heaven, going to hell thing as like the starting point of the discussion, the impetus for it, right? It falls within the context. So if I have reason to believe that there's God, if I have reason, and then they think, well, then they're, they believe the resurrection is true, or they had some religious experience, or right, that all kind of is upstream of the warranting river, so to speak. Whereas when I think when the skeptic and the atheist comes along and says, oh, well, you want me to believe and you have believe or you go to hell, right? Well, you're like 100 miles downstream kind of looking up and saying, well, why should I go upstream to your spring head, from this starting point down here. So I don't know if that kind of makes sense at all, but I think you're kind of looking at it from different directions than really how they would understand why they believe what they believe. As far as your other question though, about God needing to act first, right? I mean I point this out now, and I pointed out previously, although I cared a whole lot more about heresy when I when I was an Orthodox Christian. And that's that. I mean, Christianity, in the Orthodox sense, right? Historic Orthodoxy has affirmed that God does have to act first, right? Whether it's illumination if you're a Roman Catholic, enlightenment if you're some type of Arminian or Wesleyan, or regeneration if you're Reformed, right? There's always this kind of view of this some kind of prevenience, some type of prevenient grace, whether however weak or strong you think that is, such that without that, the person who's dead in sin cannot freely believe on by their own by their own ability on power, right? The denial of that just is that just is the Pelagian controversy, right? Now one might say, well, Pelagianism or semi-Pelagianism shouldn't have been condemned, like we shouldn't consider it a heresy. That's fine, but then that's a whole different can of worms, right? But I think to your point, if we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to deal with people who are kind of Christian in this historic sense, yeah, I think there really is a problem of saying, well, if someone doesn't believe, right, how are they responsible, for their not belief? I don't know if that's kind of where you're getting to, or
Yes.
why should they be responsible, right? So
Yes, and it ties into how I started this off by reasons for not believing. Almost any reason being good, because it shouldn't be possible for you to not believe.
yeah,
If you take the claims of Christianity seriously.
yeah, and I think you've mentioned this before, and you said it in a very eloquent way that I was trying to get at in my first series. Is Schellenberg has this idea of non-resistant non-believers that shouldn't exist if kind of this all-loving God exists, and you pointed out what I was getting at way better than I did. Just that, well, you can make a stronger claim, right? Non-resistant apostates like me shouldn't exist, right? That's a very different claim, because someone on the inside who is believing and who wants to believe and all that all that kind of stuff, apostasy shouldn't happen, for various different reasons. Now I think that there is a response that they can say, oh well, you're still responsible for the same way that, a warden, people in prison, they still go to prison because they're guilty of the bad things they do. It's not somehow unjust for the warden or the president to not pardon everybody and only to pardon some. And I think that's a valid criticism. The problem, though, is that I think if Christianity is true, the warden and the president aren't analogous to what we see the Bible presenting God as the loving father, the one who sets up the whole system, right? The warden and the president aren't guilty or unjust because they didn't pardon you, because they didn't set up the entire system. They didn't make that the rules. They couldn't have omnipotently intervened throughout your life to prevent you from doing those crimes in the first place without violating your freedom. Right? It's just not analogous, right? It gets at that one small principle. This is that 5 centimeters forward, 500 miles back, right? Yes, it shows why it wouldn't be unjust if it was, to pardon some and not others. But then it opens up this whole problem of, yeah, but God is supposed to be your loving father. And I can think of a billion ways that if my son was playing, no matter how much he hated me and it was doing despite me, was playing in the middle of the freeway and was going to get crunched by a truck, I don't care about his soul building and his free will and all that kind of stuff. If it was in my power to prevent him from getting hit by a semi truck, I would do it. And I wouldn't set. And then if you push back and say, okay, well, God even set it up so that there would be semi trucks and freeways and all that kind of stuff, right? It just that problem just compounds and compounds and compounds. So I think the answer that you're getting at, or the question that you're getting at, is a good one, and the answer is generally given, don't overcome. So I don't know if that kind of answers and advances at the same time.
Yeah. So we've got one more topic. I do want to be fair to Dale, though. First of all, Dale, if you can, close out this thought in a minute or two, and if there's anything in the comments that you think should be brought in, hit me.
Yeah. So I guess about like what Tyler was just saying. So again, I disagree with Tyler. I don't think that this is an issue, and it relates back to that Molinistic defeater. And I think I'm trying to remember the words, the way that Tyler worded it when he was describing William Lane Craig. Because remember, middle knowledge entails, in a way, that God. I wouldn't agree with this terminology, but this is the way Tyler said it: that God's not ase. He's not the one that totally sets it up. Our libertarian free will restrict God in a sense as to which worlds are feasible for him to actualize. So I would say that God is sovereign in that, yeah, he chooses to actualize a world, and therefore the sets of circumstances that he knows in advance will be conducive or influence us to make the choices that we do. But again, he's not determining that in advance, because it's what God knows we would freely choose to do. That's really determining God and kind of influencing God as to, okay, well, which world is the best world for me to actualize? So I think that kind of avoids the problem of this. Yeah, well, God's the one who sets up the rules. Well, no, he's not. He's in part he is, but he's also not ase, as Tyler would put it as well. So,
well,
yeah.
Can I know we wanted last word. Can I push back on that somehow?
Sure. Yeah, you're the guest.
So I don't know if you've watched. I've done a lot of content on Molinism. And I could push back on that in about 20 different ways, but let me push back on this way.
Okay.
Right. Ignoring the free will question, why is it the case that that God's creation is set up such that sin is corrosive? Right. Sin is corrosive to nature. Sin is corrosive to our human nature. Could God have not set up the metaphysics of his cosmos differently? Put a pin in the free will question.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why is it the case that when Adam sinned, his posterity, his nature became corrupted, and his posterity came? Why is it that God created the devil in the first place? Why is it that God placed the trees in the garden, so to speak, whatever your view on that is, that represents right there. I find it, the free, again, this is where the free will answer just doesn't even get to the real problem of it, and that is that God isn't I mean, besides the fact that I think it's wildly problematic, and there's all kinds of other problems with saying that God is restrained by something, or to say that God is omnipotent, which means that he can do any logically possible thing, and so there's logically possible worlds where we all freely choose to believe. I think the distinction between feasibility and possibility when you're talking about omnipotence God is largely meaningless. But besides that, God set up the metaphysics of this creation. He actualized this world and not some other world. He is not this kind of passive, confined being that I think Molinism needs for the Molinistic defeater to even have a chance of going through.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, so I would just respond. So, in one sense, okay, just restricting it to the corruption that sin has on the person, the sinner themselves. I don't think it is logically possible for God to have created us differently. No, it's just a necessary fact that the sinner contaminated by sin will have these things, just like a disease will have these necessary symptoms. I do agree with you that, okay, maybe, well, why is creation? God is actively kind of, if you're taking the Genesis thing just literally, right? Like, okay, now there's certain consequences beyond the sinner themselves that God is setting up the system in advance. And my answer to that is what the Molinistic defeater ultimately is in a sentence. The end goal, it's this outcome. God wants to save as many free will creatures as possible. And that's contingent on us making a free will decision in order to be saved. So that's, for me, where the free will aspect comes in. But yeah, and it just so happens to be that there is no feasible world where more souls freely choose to be saved than this world. So that's why God had to do it this way. That the Satan, the creation being affected by Adam's sin, this is all necessary in order to get that end goal. Any other changes in the system, less souls will choose to be saved.
So
yeah, well, I mean,
Ahead.
I would love to keep having this discussion, but I mean, I would just say, well, I mean, I can think of the world. Don't create Satan. Problem solved, right? I mean, you think you clearly think as a Molinist that Adam had free will, right? So if Adam has free will, right, he would have continued. His progeny would have had free will, all that kind of stuff. Get rid of Satan, get rid of the serpent. Bob's your uncle. There you go. There's no fall, and Adam and Eve ostensibly would have still procreated. They still would have gotten everything, and now you have nearly a potential infinite amount of people that would they would have the same freedom Adam had, and there wouldn't have been a fall, and they would have been saved. Just don't create Satan.
How do you? There still would have been a fall. It just would have happened differently, right?
So do
Maybe.
you? So that's my other question then. Do you think the fall? There's no logically possible world where the fall wouldn't happen.
I think there's a logically possible world. I also think there's a logically possible world where God sins as well. So I'm different from you there and stuff, right? But there's no metaphysical. This is why that distinction is important for me, because there is no feasible world.
So then, do you think free will? Sorry, I don't mean. If
No,
you can
no.
give me like 5 minutes on this discussion, do you think free will logically necessitates evil? Like
No.
you cannot have libertarian free will without there being like there's no feasible world where there's free will and no evil as an outcome.
Well, there's no feasible world where uh, I think that there are. Sorry, say that again. There's no feasible world where there's no sin and what?
Just given libertarian freedom,
Mhm.
right? It is incontrovertible that there will be a fall. There will be sin. There will be evil and suffering and pain. You cannot have a world with libertarian free creatures and it be sinless.
I'm not sure about that transworld depravity, because there could be possible worlds where there are just six people that are great. I mean, certainly the angel Gabriel proved that free will creatures can choose never to sin. So I think that is a feasible thing. It just comes down to the question of, yeah, but how many souls or all free will souls are ultimately going to be saved? And maybe there are feasible worlds where there are only six people or 6,000 and they never sin. So it's a perfect world, no fall, great. But this world is better because with the fall, we have 5 million or 50 billion, whatever the number is. God knows, I don't know.
But if there was no fall and we weren't fallen in Adam in the biblical sense, right? Because the Bible clearly views Adam as the covenant representative that brings sin and death into the entire world. Let's say again, Adam doesn't fall, the federal head doesn't fall, right?
Okay.
Right?
Okay. You might be right.
I guess I would push back and just be like, I don't see how you have the fall, and then you get into all kinds of problems. Well, maybe 10 generations down on this branch, those people fall, but then the other people don't have a sin nature. So you still have branches and branches, and this ever compounding or growing branching of unfallen. You'd have a nearly limitless number of unfallen. I guess the out that you're trying to provide, I think, and this is where I generally push back on Molinism. I think that Molinism puts a certain view of libertarian free will at its starting point, tries to work out the system. I think it ends up being wildly. I could give it 100 reasons why I think there's a problem, but at the end of the day, I also think it's trying to rescue a certain biblical view of something, and I think it ends up doing things that are wildly unbiblical. And this is one of those cases. I think the Bible very, very clearly shows whether it's Genesis 3, whether you're going through in some of the Psalms, whether you're going through Romans 5, whether you're all these kinds of things. Adam is the federal representative. He is the one, that the fountainhead by which sin comes in. The corrosion happens to him and his posterity. Let's say Adam and Eve didn't follow the serpent. You have the next generation. Well, it only affects that branch. Maybe because they're not even that branch might not even be the federal head. So where is the inheritance from? Right? It creates. This is where I'm saying you've given a 5 centimeter answer, but now you've created 5 miles of problems. Does that make sense?
That does to David, apparently. Yeah.
I am creating a rainfall here because I am going to have to rain on this parade.
Sorry, bring it in. Dale, come on my show. We'll talk about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean this is a show, and trust me, Dale and I have had this show a few times. I think I would enjoy just being a fly on the wall as Dale discusses this with someone else. I know that Dale is probably thinking, did you share some notes with David? Because I've made some of these arguments, maybe not quite as well myself with Dale. So I know that Dale has some responses to this, and I know that there are responses to the responses. It's a great show. It just doesn't happen to be the one that we're having right now. So
sorry about that. Sorry.
No. I'm the moderator, so that's my problem. But
yeah, I let you be the not moderator, and so I was the one who had to have some responsibility, and that's always a mistake when it's left up to me. But here we are. Look, this last topic, it's actually very simple. I think not very controversial. It's just one that I don't have an answer for. And so I mostly threw this one in for me, which is, once a person decides that they have deconstructed, they have walked away from their faith in religion or faith in God or whatever, what should they do next? Now, this seems like if a person was only kind of nominally a Christian, only marginally a Christian, then there's no big change when they decide that they're not going to be a Christian. I mean, it's not like they devoted their entire lives to the study of the Bible or, having discussions about this stuff. I mean, so whatever they were doing before is what they're going to keep doing, most likely. However, if you have someone who was far more involved, someone like myself, for instance, who was a preacher and has been some form of leader in the church from a very young age. The church is all I knew. leadership in the church is all I knew. Public speaking and performances is all I knew. Um, where do I go from there? Well, apparently I didn't go very far because I started blogging, I started podcasting, I started doing all of the things that I would have, that are maybe analogous to some of the things I would have been doing as a Christian. So I didn't go far away at all. Tyler, a person, a man of study, a seminarian, a person who was a leader in the church, uh, doing podcasts with a public ministry. How far did he go? Still doing the same podcast. Um, Dale, I don't know what stage of Christianity you would have been in when you walked away. I'd be curious to know what you did when you walked away. I don't want to hear a list of sins uh, later. But what what we did may not, in fact, be the healthiest thing to have done. And when people write me about this, yeah, I've been a Christian. I've decided to that I'm no longer a believer. What do I do? I don't know. I have no idea. I've got a feeling that I've got the balance all wrong, but I have no idea what to do with myself. I've tried to do other things. I've tried to just ignore theology and leave it, but it's a huge chunk of my brain. I needed lobotomy uh, to set it aside. And yet I still don't know if the thing that I have chosen is the healthiest of things to do. So I'm curious from both of your perspectives. When someone is decides that they're done with it, they're a stamp collector, and they've collected thousands and thousands of stamps, and they finally realize, collecting stamps is stupid. Why would you continue studying stamps? Which is basically Tyler and I. So I'm just gonna start with you, Tyler. What should a person do when they walk away?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if there is a right answer for what you should do. I mean, that's going to be largely person dependent. I mean, I think you should, uh, continue to work on being the best version of yourself that you can be, the most authentic version of yourself you can be. I think you should try to walk in the light, as it were, to develop and grow. And in some cases, you may have to work on mending relationships or developing new relationships, or whatever that is. Outside of just like the general humanity of it, what should you do with regards to study and all this kind of stuff? I mean, I get this question a lot of people are like, why are you still talking about it? Why do you even care? A lot of Christians, and a lot of times it's because they don't want to deal with the objections. But there's a sense where I'm going to say, well, because like what I said at the top of the show, like it's still important, it's still interesting, it's still important, it still has impact on society. It's still I want to know and understand. If it's true, I would like to know that. If it's not, I would like to know that. I would like to understand my neighbors better and my friends and my family better and continue to grow. And I just also I think it's okay just to find it fascinating. You look at atheist New Testament scholars and Old Testament scholars. I just find it fascinating. The example that I normally give is uh, someone could be sold out on the military. Come from a military family, love it, thinks it's the best thing in the world, all that kind of stuff. Study it, the ins and outs of it, all that kind of stuff. They could have a change of view and then think that the military is military industrial complex and have all kinds of objections to all that kind of stuff, but still be fascinated by military history and military strategy and military. It could still be. I forget who said it. I think Ehrman said it. But he said, you could still be concerned with truth. And you could have there's a reason why there's historians who study Greco-Roman mythology. They don't believe in Zeus, but they still find it fascinating and interesting, and how it fueled civilization in the past, and how it fueled literature and all those kinds of things. And they still have debates about it and discussions about it. It's still interesting if you still find it interesting and you still find it valuable and you still enjoy the discussions and you still like getting to know people and getting to know different views and all that. Then keep doing that. Keep doing what you enjoy doing. Even if other people are like, well, you know, why do you still do it if you don't think it's true?
So Dale,
Mhm.
I study the Bible more than most Christians, which is ridiculous because I think the Bible is garbage. I don't think it's a particularly well written book. I study Paul and talk about Paul and write about Paul because I think he's maybe the most important, influential person in world history. I think he's had a greater impact on the world than almost anyone that I can think of. I don't think highly of him, but I do think he's important. And so I'm probably more of a theologian now than I was when I was a Christian. It just feels a little bit backward, but there's one other aspect to this, and you can speak to this as well, Dale. I think that a person is never done deconstructing. I think that deconstruction, this thing that ex-evangelists do, is a process that lives with you. It's like a tumor that you have. It could be benign, but it doesn't go away. And one of the reasons internet atheists are on the internet atheisting, I think, whether we realize it or not, or know it or not, I think it is a part of our ongoing deconstruction and mental well being process because we have to process it. And it's something that has been so important and big in our lives. You can't just not process it. You can't just pretend like it doesn't exist anymore. Well, I don't believe it anymore, so it's gone. No, it's never gone. And sometimes therapy lasts a lifetime, and I think there's a certain aspect of ongoing deconstruction and therapy to all of this, in addition to the fact that it's just a hobby that we've all developed. But Dale, what do you think? What should, in your opinion, what's the best thing for people who no longer believe to do with themselves?
Yeah, so in the first place, I do agree with how Tyler started that there is no one size fits all approach. People are going to be in different states and stuff like that when they lose their faith in Christianity in particular, or just anything. Are we talking in general or what?
Well, I'd say Christianity in particular.
Christianity. Yeah. So okay, cool. So yeah, when you lose your Christianity, that is probably the most important part of your life, at least from the perspective of a Christian, right? And when you're coming out of that, you're losing a whole bunch of stuff that is core to who you are. So I think that it depends on what state you're in. For me, I went through a 6 month period as an agnostic before I finally realized that actually I am a theist and that sort of thing. And that's where I kind of got my meaning. So I kind of agree with you that it's always going to be a process of, you call it deconstructing, I would call it constructing. You're looking to construct a worldview, something to replace that important aspect of your life. Okay, how do I make sense of the world? What am I? What is my purpose? Do I even have a purpose, and that sort of thing? So I think that's kind of what we should do is look, unless you have 100% degree of knowledge that Christianity is false or whatever faith you have is false, you should never be closed-minded to it. You should always be open to learning, hey, maybe I'm wrong. It's possible I'm wrong and Christianity was right. So you should always be open to that front. And I agree with Tyler that religions in general purport to be the most important truth claim that's out there. I don't necessarily think that truth of everything is just worthy in and of itself. There's a truth about how many sand grains are on the beach. I'm not going to be a real seeker. I'm not going to seek out the truth of that. I don't know. I don't care. It's not important. Although if somebody wants to figure it out, I'll be like, all right, cool. There's that many grains. Great. But with religions, these purport to give you your ultimate purpose in creation, It gives you the instructions, presumably, on how you achieve that ultimate purpose, and what the nature of ultimate reality is. And this is why I think there is this duty on us to, unless you're absolutely certain a given religion is false or something, you should be open to learning that is true. I mean, there's literally nothing. Your wife, your kids, your job, nothing else. All else pales in comparison, compared to achieving what you were made or designed to do in creation. And for that reason, because of these major significance, you should be open to learning, is that true or not? So yeah, do it in your own time. I mean, like I said, sometimes it's a process. It takes you time before you're ready to do that search, but just be a real seeker. If an opportunity comes up, don't be closed to it, or don't just dismiss it. Take advantage of those opportunities to learn the truth. Yeah.
So let's have a round of final thoughts. Tyler, on pretty much all of the shows that I do, there's an opportunity for a last word. This is an uninterrupted few moments where you can just say some of the things that maybe you didn't get a chance to say, or close off some loose ends. I'm going to allow you to give your last words last, so that you can think about what you want to say there. I want to start by saying thank you to Dale and to Tyler for this excellent conversation. Thank you for the lurkers in the clown car. You did not disappoint. And I'm going to think about some stuff, I think. But I can tell you where I am. I've written a article or two that I haven't put online yet, or actually I can't remember what I've put online at this point. Probably be online by the time you hear this. But I've been really thinking about where I am in this whole religious story, and I've come to the conclusion that not only do I not consider myself a seeker of religion, religious truth anymore. I don't think it's possible for me to be a religious believer anymore. I just don't think it's possible. That some of the things that Dell mentioned, things like ultimate purpose and eternal consequence and things like that, I don't care about. I don't believe they exist at all. Philosophically, they don't make any sense to me. And so I find that I'm over it from that point of view, except I'm never fully over it, because I'm still having these conversations and doing these shows. And so that might seem like a contradiction in terms, but I really am not in any doubt about how I feel about these things. I'm out. I'm actually well and truly out. And I think the more I think about it, the reason I continue to do what I do, it's not merely to help other people think about these things as I wish I had thought about them, but I think there is a sense of therapy to it. I think that religious trauma syndrome is a real thing. I think that I probably have it. I should probably see a counselor. Probably not going to. However, maybe some of you other deconverts who find yourself dealing with this and churning through this over the course of your lifetime, counseling may be a good idea. Or maybe you find an outlet online in a community where you can talk about this stuff openly, and maybe that would be enough for you. But I would just say that if you were religious and you are no longer religious for whatever reason, and you are listening to this show, you are still deconstructing, because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to the show at all. And you should think about what that means for you and your psyche and your mental health, and think seriously about what you should do about that. Maybe you're doing enough. Maybe listening to the show is enough, but maybe there's more. Don't ignore it. I think it's an important signal that we should take seriously. Dale, your final thoughts?
Well, yeah. So I was trying to keep track of the questions. There were a couple questions. I see Tyler's already given his answer, but it looks like they're questions for me. So do you want me to read
Oh,
that?
I tell you what, before you give your final thought, if you want to bring up, I meant to give a chance to bring up some of the chat questions, so go ahead and do that.
No problem. So, okay, so we got two for me. For me, it looks like, but Tyler spoke to it as well. But okay, so the first one is Brian. We're going back to that Molinism thing, and he's asking, how can I have free will to do something before God creates me, and the circumstances of that choice? And well, it's to be humorous, look, you exist as a thought in the mind of God, and I guess in God's also causal potential. That's where your free will exists, if it makes sense to speak that way. But look, God, there's a hypothetical, there's a conditional statement. God knows all truths, and that's a truth that God knows. He knows that it's true. If Brian were created and in this circumstances, he would make this choice. So it's not necessarily saying that you actually exist or your will exists and stuff like that. It's just there's this hypothetical statement that's a truth, and that exists in God's mind. He knows that that's true. That conditional statement's true. And then there's this question Darren brings up about heaven. Okay, so if my Molinistic defeater is true about getting that end outcome of saving as many souls to be in a state of salvation at the end of the world, well, how does heaven exist, and stuff like that in the meantime? And look, I would just say the point here is that what you're calling heaven, that end goal, that state, the end, whereby as many souls freely choose to be saved as possible, cannot exist without the preceding antecedent factors, and including the fallen world and that sort of thing. It needs all phases of the creation in order to arrive at that end state. You can't just pluck out the fallen world phase of the universe or something and then just have heaven in an isolated state. At least that's the claim that I would say no, that's just impossible to happen. You have to go through those growing pains, so to speak, in order to get to that what you're calling heaven state at the end. And then for my last word, I just want to say thank you to Tyler for coming on and sharing his deconversion story. It's always a pleasure being on a show with him. He's very knowledgeable and he's into philosophy like me, so that's always a fun time. Thanks for doing the show. It was fun.
Tyler.
I don't have anything really to add conceptually. Just thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, and we definitely would love to do it again, or have any combination of y'all on the show to talk about some of these topics, and look forward to continue the discussion. So thank you.
Very much so. And if it seems like I was a bit mercenary in cutting off some conversations, Dale and I, after a reasonable break, are going to do a show on his 11 premise argument. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I've read his larger work, and he often alludes to this, but I know that most people don't know what his 11 premise argument is, and so that show is about to happen. So if you listen to this show and you want to go a little bit deeper into what some of Dale thinks about this stuff, this was kind of an introduction. Some of the parts of this conversation to that. You will hear them again, I promise. So with that, skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com, log into your Discuss account and discuss away. Send me an email if you prefer. skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Find Dale at Real Seekers. Real Seekers, is it Real Seekers Ministry? Okay, Dale, I've forgotten. I thought I knew it. Dale, how do people find you?
My
Tyler,
blog,
how do people? Okay, there you go. Dale, how do people find you?
my blog is so realseekerministries.wordpress.com, and on YouTube or Rumble, just like search Real Seekers, plural with an S.
Okay, and Tyler, go ahead and plug your show and works again.
Yeah, so people can find me on the Freed Thinker on YouTube, the Freed Thinker on there's a Facebook group, and then the blog is the freedthinkerpodcast.blogspot.com.
Okay, and with that, we will see you next time. Bye bye.